102,397, 102,398, 102,399, and oh, wait a second. How am I supposed to get out of here? Oops. To start, let's talk about the new fluid system. It has an automatic pipe visualization, so if I hover over any pipe, it'll show a visualizer of the system. As you can see, we got some lines here. The dotted line means it's an underground, and the arrow means it's either going in or out of a system. And each fluid is color-coded. You can also see this from the map view. Each of these lines here is a fluid network. You can see the undergrounds are here. You can see the pumps show up as this little cyan here. So if I zoom in, you can see that's a pump. So this makes it very convenient to double check how your systems are put together. The way it works is that the game breaks up the fluid systems into what are called extents. Hi. The way I like to think about it is that these are pipe systems. I have one pipe system here and one pipe system here. If I want to connect them, I just put a pump between them. Obviously, I'll have to power this, but when I do, they'll be connected. If I'm building this system over here and this top part is too far away from this bottom part, I can just put a pump between them. And though it's broken up into two systems, they are both connected by this pump. Other entities also break up systems like chemical plants and oil refineries. Entities that have pass-through arrows, like the ones on the sides of the boilers, do not interrupt fluid segments and instead simply let that fluid segment pass through. Also, as a fun bonus tip, offshore pumps still produce 1200 water per second, but boilers only consume 6 units per second, but still produce 60 units of steam. That's because the new ratio of water to steam is 1 to 10. That means that one offshore pump will now supply enough water for 200 boilers, not 20. It's still 2 steam engines per boiler though. The only problem you'll run into, pun totally intended, is that when you're laying these pipes, you may run into a problem as you get farther and farther out. Eventually, this happens. Oh, it's too long. What's happening is there is a limit to the size of the system you can have. You can see it's pretty darn big. This one pipe system starts all the way over here and ends right now over here. I'd like to connect it to this system over here, which has my oil pumps. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to find the spot where it's giving me the error. You'll notice you get this flashing water drop thing. It also shows up as an alert on your system here. All I'll do is I'll get rid of this. I'll put down a pump and keep going. Give it a radar just because I'm making a video. And where are my radars? Okay, fine. Point is, now it works. It's also going the wrong way. So I'm going to hit R to reverse. The system is very permissive. If I go into map view, this is 10 chunks large, and there's actually hidden patches under here, which is hilarious. But basically, this square is 320 by 320. That is to say 10 chunks, each chunk being 32 tiles. And it is nothing but solid pipes. So if I hover over here, it says everything is hunky-dory. However, if I add one more pipe, it says nope, and I would have to put some kind of pump between this and wherever else I'd like to go. You'll also notice it highlights the entire problem area in red, which in this case is the entire square. And the spots we see the flashes on are the areas that are too far apart. This pipe is too far apart from these pipes on the other end of this thing right here. Boom. As I said earlier, this is a very permissive system. If you somehow manage to build in a 10 chunk by 10 chunk area without using a single pump, I don't know what I can do to help you. You also might notice that I have these arrows here. These essentially tell you how far it is to the edge of the system. As you can see here, this would continue down 145 meters down, into the side, all that good stuff. It changes a bit depending on what your zoom level is, because what it's showing you is the distance from the edge of the screen to the edge of the system. Another thing to note is that the way fluid flows is a bit different. Essentially, each one of these systems, or segments, is treated as if it was one giant fluid box. Each entity in the world that can contain fluids has what's called a fluid box, and all that does is it tells the game how much fluid the entity has at that moment. There's a bit more to it, but that's the basic idea. So yes, each piece of pipe technically has its own individualized fluid box, but when fluid is forced into the system, fluid is distributed amongst all the pipes evenly. To show this off, I have a tip. If you press F4, it'll bring up a whole menu full of debug options. We can search this, and I'm going to type fluid, and turn on fluid box info. We'll see what this does in a second. What I want to show is that the fluid flowing into the system will be evenly distributed immediately across all the pipes. So let's go ahead and plug it in. And as you can see, we have these little green bars. Those green bars are filling up. And what we can also see is that there is a green bar here, which is basically the same amount here, but proportionally. This is a thing that can hold 25,000 units, and this can hold 100. So you'll notice the proportion is what's being held the same here, not necessarily the amount of fluid. This does bring me to one downside. The system has lost the flavor of having a pressure drop across all the pipes. That is to say, it doesn't matter how long the pipe system is, because each segment of pipe is going to have the same amount of fluid in it, no matter how many pipes are connected together or how long it is. It also means that you don't necessarily have to use undergrounds in order to save on fluid pressure anymore. Now the best reason to use these undergrounds is so that you can drive across your base and not hit things that you've put down. But that doesn't mean the concept of pressure is absent entirely. It's just that now the idea of pressure manifests as the boundaries between systems, pumps, entities, that sort of thing. That is to say, the rate of exchange of fluid between this pump and this pipe system has to do with how full each of them are. That ratio determines how quickly the fluid goes in here. So there is still the idea of pressure, it's just that it only happens at these boundaries like this. Personally, I like it. I think that makes the system a lot more intuitive. But that's just me, and if you disagree, well, shine on you, crazy diamond. The other part of this is that pumps now have a larger role in determining the topology of your fluid network. That is to say, the different fluid systems here, made up of pipes, essentially get directionality from pumps. So you have things going into one system and out of another. This is great though. You can now make a fluid splitter. Because this fluid network here is going to have an even amount of fluid in the whole thing, what we're going to do is to take our petroleum input here, and the other half to go off and make sulfuric acid. Let's turn the fluid overlay on. There we go. And let's see what happens. As you can see, we have half of the fluid here, 736, and half the fluid here, 736. This is huge and something I've wanted in the game for a long time. There is one wrinkle though. If you use pumps before this in order to make this work, it doesn't quite work as expected. You'll notice it's close, that's 777, and that's 787, but it's not perfectly balanced. If I repeat the experiment with a pipe going in, the problems only get worse. This tank now has all the fluid, and this one has none. I'm not exactly sure what's causing this. I think it has to do with the way these things are updated. That is to say, this one goes first, this one goes second, this one goes third, something like that. But my basic advice to you is to essentially only use pumps to go in and out of systems, and if you want to split something, just use a regular pipe network with no flourishes. It'll be fine. Last couple of details, the pump itself is changed. You can now give it a filter, and it'll only let that particular fluid through. It did get something of a nerf. Its pumping speed is only 1200 units per second as opposed to 12,000. It isn't something you use. Oh, my cat's here. Hello. I guess it's cat time. Hello. What was I saying? The next thing is something that doesn't require a whole lot of explanation, but it is really, really cool. It's called the Factoriopedia. You can access it by clicking on the icon up here, or as you can see from the tooltip, you can alt left click on things. Looking around here, you can basically click on stuff, and it'll give you an enormous amount of information on it. You can see what machines craft it and what ingredients are needed to make it. If there's more than one recipe, it'll list the alternate recipes here, and you can click on those and get information about it here. You can click on techs, and it'll take you to the tech tree, whatever. You can alt-click on just about anything. You can alt-click on grass. You can alt-click on iron ore. You can alt-click on rocks, trees, water. You can alt-click on fish. I don't know why you would. You can even see the information on novice. Most of this doesn't matter unless you're playing Space Age, but there are two pieces of information on here. The day-night cycle is 7 minutes, and the evolution factor for the current surface is listed right there. For those that don't know, the evolution factor goes from 0 to 1. Oop, it just ticked up there. 0 is the beginning of the game, and 1 is the end of the game. Time passing, pollution being absorbed, and killing enemies are the things that drive up the number. But whatever the number is, you can take a look at it here without needing to use a command or use any sort of mod. You can read lurid details about the enemies. You can even look at the spawn probability. I don't want to go over everything in this just because it would take too long, and honestly, this is something you should explore on your own. I also predict this is going to come in clutch with mods. The tech tree has gotten an overhaul. There's now something called trigger techs. If you look at the electronics tech here, you'll notice that in order to research it, you have to craft 10 copper plate. In order to get steam power, you craft 50 iron plate. It's pretty straightforward. There are different types of triggers. They're basically events under the hood. For example, with uranium, it has mine entity uranium ore. You can tell it's a trigger tech by looking in the tech tree here. Instead of science bottles, you have a thing. The research queue is always on, so I can set these to go in order. In fact, you can't turn the research queue off. It's no longer an option. You can also reorder the techs. So for example, if I need this first, I can simply click it over. And what's nice is it'll actually maintain how much research has been done on it. As you can see, it's got some research done here. And if I switch it back, it'll pick up where it's left off. Also, if I mouse over this, you can see what the progress is. That is to say, it says 1 out of 10. It shows the science per minute. It shows the remaining time estimate and a graph showing you how much you're making over time. It's a small thing, but it's a wonderful thing. The map view has also gotten a ton of updates. I've talked a little bit about them in previous episodes, but for completeness, I might mention a few things over again. To start, we can now add pins. If I alt-right click, it'll add a pin on the map, and this is visible only to me, not to other players in multiplayer. If you look over at the right dock, you see I've got the 4 pins here. If I mouse over any one of them, I can see what's there. I can, of course, edit these. If I click on this, I can change the zoom level of the preview. I can say whether or not it's visible. I can give it a label, whatever I want. I can also get rid of it and get back to where we started. You can also add them from the map view. If I add one that's outside the range of the player or any radars, you get the blocky map view. You can use the back and forward buttons to navigate back through the history of views that you've just done. These pins also tie in with the new alert system. If I mouse over the alert here, it'll show me what's in it. And if I click, you can see I get a list of what's happening. If you mouse over these, you can see I also get a floating map. There's also a new no path alert, which happens when a train can't find a path to a train stop. This will show both the train and the train stop to help you diagnose stuff. You can also click on these and it'll take you to the location. And of course, you can pin it. And it'll even give it an auto label. This is great because this kind of acts like a to-do list. So like if you're trying to get something done, you can essentially put a bunch of pins down. This kind of acts like a to-do list. So if I add a whole bunch of pins here, I can then simply go to these places, do whatever is needed there, and then get rid of the pin. And because this is visible only to me, this will not bother other people. As always, you can still add tags. So if I click here, I can give it some kind of symbol to show up on the map. I can give it a name. Hi. You can set the grid snapping to something measured in tiles. Let's say 2. Confirm. And then I can put this wherever I like. Click, and we're good. However, what's new is now I can move it. So if I hold Shift and click, I can now reset it wherever I like. I can also just click on it, and I get the same dialog I had a second ago and can change whatever I like. We also have pings, and if you hover over with a mouse, you can see what the key binding is. It's Control-Alt-Left-Click for me. These can be seen by others in multiplayer, and they are temporary. So if someone puts down a ping, you can put a pin there and keep track of it however you need. And because I love it so much, I just want to mention again that you can search the map and hit Control F. You can say copper ore, and it'll take you to the copper ore patch. You can also get assembling machines that are making things. I can search for satellite, and you can see I have an assembling machine making it. The search results I get will be listed here, and they'll show up just like alerts do, in that you can mouse over it, and you can click on it and put a pin, whatever. There's a new feature for those who play in multiplayer, a little button here that says players. If you click on it, it shows everyone who's connected. And if you mouse over it, you can see just how alone you are. Also, you can do this. You can also press L. That'll take you to the logistics map view. And now I can pick whichever network I have. Right now I've only got the one. Select an item, and it'll show me the chest where that thing is located. From the map view, I can also click on trains and edit their schedules, or train stations and edit their details. But I go over these things in more details in other videos. If you want to see those, I've got links in the description. There have also been some critical updates to how burner inserters function. So right now we have a blue belt. The burner inserter has 50 coal in it. And it'll actually be able to pick stuff up off the blue belt, because this is clearly something anyone would ever do, under any circumstances, in their entire lives, ever. The electric network info page has been updated. You can now see the accumulator charge as it's going up. This will be handy for bases that need a lot of accumulator charge. You can now control Spidertrons and tanks from the map view. I go over here. You can use whatever you have bound to enter vehicle, and you'll go inside. You can move around and do stuff. This also works with tanks. You can go inside of here. You can drive over to a biter's nest, realize you don't have any ammo or weapons, and, just hope for the best. Also, this happens, which is just amazing. Wait, what? Oh dear. I don't know how to cast magic missile at this darkness. I only know science missile. Unfortunately, this does not work with cars. If you click on a Spidertron or tank remotely, you actually have a green button saying drive remotely. The Spidertron remote is now an abstract item. You can get it by clicking on one of these buttons here. It also shows you on mouse over all the commands you can do. You left click to drag a selection. You hold shift to add to the selection. You hold control to remove from the selection. You right click to send them somewhere. And you can shift right click to add to the selection. It's kind of cute, really. Unfortunately, the Spidertron remote does not work on tanks. 3 of these remotes have been turned into abstract items. That's the Spidertron and artillery remote. And if you open this menu, you can see the other one, which is the discharge defense remote. If you try to put this in your inventory, it won't work. It'll just disappear. As a side tip, if you click on this, you can control what's contained in this menu in a couple of different ways. You can, of course, turn these things on or off. Personally, anything that I know how to use the keybind for, I tend to leave off just so it takes up less screen real estate. You can also move where it is in the list by grabbing these and moving them up and down. And if you go to Settings, Interface, you can control how many rows there are here. The active quick bars are the 10 tile wide things here. So you can have 3 of those. And the shortcut bar rows are the ones we were just working with. So I could make 4 of those. And as you can see, now I have 4 rows. Silos work a bit differently now. Instead of having to give it rocket control units, you simply give it processing units. Rocket control units aren't in the game anymore. It takes 10 of each of these things in order to make one rocket part. And each rocket part gives you 1% rocket progress. Silos can now buffer a rocket, so you now can have 2. And you still give it a satellite like normal, except now, instead of actually getting the science back in the silo itself, you get it back at the cargo landing pad. So if I launch this rocket here, it does the thing. Also, you can see the graphics have been updated. That's pretty cool. And there it goes. Bye-bye. What you might want to notice, though, is... sure. You'll also notice the doors did not open and shut here, and instead simply remained open. This means they can launch a bit faster. Additionally, you can see the science just landed. So if I click on this, it's just a giant chest that has the science packs in it. You can only have one of these per surface. So if I try to make another, it'll complain that you can only build 1 per surface. Beyond that, it's pretty much exactly the same as usual. Crafting machines in general have a new GUI. This applies to furnaces, this applies to assembling machines, it applies to rocket silos. If you want to see information about the items involved in the recipe, the ingredients are over here like normal. But now, when you hover over the output, you're getting the items tooltip and not the recipe. If you want the recipe tooltip, it's over here. The tooltip on the side now tells you how many items per second are consumed and produced by the machine. In this case, it's consuming 15.5 gears per second, 23.3 pipes per second, and it's producing 7.79 offshore pumps per second, which, fine. But what's really nice is that number reflects the actual value right now of this machine, considering the crafting speed of the machine, which is 1.25, any modules that have been placed in it, any beacons that are affecting it, all that good stuff. It also tells you how many beacons are influencing it, and what the percent effectiveness of each of those beacons is. It used to be that beacons distributed half the effect of the modules you put in them. So if you put 2 of these in there, they would only be half as effective. So it was kind of like having just 1. However, now that's a little bit different. The effectiveness of each beacon changes with how many beacons affect the machine. If you want to learn more, simply alt-click on it. And you can see here the transmission strength. This is cumulative transmission strength, meaning it's the effect of all the beacons put together. So if there is 1 beacon, you're getting 150% power, which is actually amazing. If you have 2 beacons, you have a total of 212%. 3 beacons, your cumulative effect is 260%, so on and so forth. At any rate, it's now a little bit different. This graph right here will do you a lot of good if you're trying to set up a build. Putting all this together, it turns out there's a really neat little update. It used to be that you couldn't get more than 1 craft per tick. That is to say, 1 craft per 60th of a second. With all the new beacon updates, this has now been removed. Just like those biters, which have been chewing on that tank this whole time. And they only removed 2 health squares. That's embarrassing. All right, let's go, let's go, let's go. Oh, man, didn't load. What am I gonna do? Oh, look at this. There seems to be a button called Manage Mods. I can now go into the mod manager and change what mods are enabled. If you're one of those people who likes to play with a whole bunch of mods, but then sometimes they conflict with one another, and you'd like more options than just enable or disable all of them, then you're gonna love this. I can't tell you how much this is going to mean to me, especially considering that modding is what I do with a lot of my free time. Also, let's go look at the updates to the mod portal. You now have an amazing new interface to explore these mods. You can sort them however you like, you can include or exclude multiple categories, and yes, despite the fact that there's no little magnifying glass here, you can still search for it. That's because the magnifying glass is over here. Whatever. Point is, the interface is a lot cleaner and easier to navigate. Okay, let's cover a few things that pertain to circuit networks, trains, and logistics that I forgot in my previous videos. First off, the big electric pole now has a wire reach of 32 and not 30, meaning it's technically 1 chunk big. Second thing is, you can actually nudge blueprints around. Here's what I mean. Let's take a blueprint of this. And as you can see, I've got the whole thing here. You can also see it extends out a bit more, and that's a bit weird, but that's okay. That's because I grabbed some tiles and I can either turn those tiles on or off. And before it knows whether or not I'd like to keep them, it errs on the side of caution and lets me turn the tiles on if I'd like. First of all, I can nudge this inside of its own frame. If I hold shift and use the arrow keys, I can move where it is. You can see now it's in the lower bottom corner. The other thing here is control arrow keys. It'll move the relative snap point that this thing is bound to. You can edit these values manually in here, whether or not it's absolute or relative snapping, that sort of thing. But it's a bit more cumbersome, and honestly, it's a lot easier to edit it in the context of the world. So those key bindings will be very useful if this is something you do a lot. One note on circuits, I've got an assembling machine here and a fast inserter here. They're connected on the green network. And right now, the assembling machine is set to read ingredients. That's 20 copper and 10 steel plate. I'd like to know what's actually on the network, but if I mouse over these, it doesn't necessarily show it on the tooltip. However, if I click on the inserter, you'll notice it says under circuit connection, connected to 1. And if I mouse over this, it'll show me what's on the network right then. You don't necessarily have to put a power pole down. Combinators that have 2 networks they connect to, one being the input and one being the output, behave similarly. And that brings me to my last point today, which is a correction, because I got something wrong. Hooray! This is a selector combinator. If you set its mode of operation to select input, it's going to give you one signal as the output, and it'll depend on the index you ask for. You can sort descending or ascending here, but what's really important is the thing that's organizing it. It's the value associated with each... Oh my gosh. That's a microphone. Hang on for one sec. It's the value associated with each signal. So right now I have 200 belt, 60 splitters, and 15 undergrounds. If I then ask this for index 1, it's then going to give me the splitters. Why? Well, if I put these in descending order, going from greatest to least, it'll go 200, 60, or 15. This gets index 0, this gets index 1, and this gets index 2. Well, we've asked for 1, and so it's giving us the splitter. Making YouTube videos is hard. Phew, that was a lot. Okay, well that's going to wrap up the spoiler-free segment of the series. The next series I'm going to make is going to be the So You Haven't Played Factorio in a While series. In that, I'll be doing deep dive into individual topics, things like belts or pipes or electric networks, that sort of thing. It should serve as a good introduction for someone who's just picking up the game for the first time, but it'll also serve people who haven't played in a while. I'm going to be as thorough as I can, and I'll share early releases to my patrons just to see if I've missed anything. On that note, I have launched a new Patreon, this time with 17% less confusion. Yeah, so basically I have a Patreon for the Taylor series. That isn't going anywhere, and at some point I will be getting back to that. But I also now have a Patreon for my Galdocs tutorial series. It's called Galdoc Makes Stuff. So if you want to support me in making tutorials, mods, games, videos, whatever, feel free to swing by. At any rate, I'm still streaming on Twitch, and I'm doing a full Space Age playthrough, so if that interests you, come check me out there too. And I think we can wrap it up here. Take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you in the next one. Oh look, some biters. Let's say hello.